Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I am here today at CBJ Tech AB up in Sweden, taking a look at a really cool submachine gun that a bunch of you guys have been asking me for actually quite a long time. This is the CBJ MS, and it is a 9mm modernized submachine gun developed by one Carl Bertil Johansson. Now, you may recognize that name from the weapon that he developed for Aimpoint in 1978, 79, 1980, which I have a previous video on. Swedish firearms designer partners up with the founders of Aimpoint right at the beginning of Aimpoint's existence in the late 1970s and designs a firearm for them, which ends up having some trouble coming to market. The two parties part ways amicably, and CBJ, Carl Bertil Johansson, ends up in the United States doing some additional firearms development, which also doesn't work out all that effectively. That would be the Viking submachine gun, which we'll talk about in a future video if I'm ever able to get my hands on one. But at the end of this experience, he moves back to his native Sweden, gets a job with the Carl Gustafs firearms or munitions factory, and while working there from the mid-1980s until basically the mid-1990s, in his own free time starts developing a couple of projects, primarily this submachine gun. The idea is to take essentially the Swedish K, the classic, robust, durable, reliable, very well-liked Swedish, it's actually the Carl Gustaf M45 submachine gun, really well liked. In particular, the U.S. Special Forces use them in Vietnam. Basically, everyone who uses the thing likes it. It's bomb-proof, accurate, effective, reliable. Well, he wants to take that concept and modernize it, turn it into something that is much smaller, that is more of a PDW sort of platform, a backup weapon for someone whose primary job is not actual infantry combat, but needs a reliable weapon. I don't know that I would call this entirely a PDW, but it's definitely a compact submachine gun, and it's intended to fill that sort of role. For a guy who needs a very compact gun to carry with him at all times, is unlikely to need it, but what makes the CBJ MS here a bit different from the other PDWs that are out there on the market today is that this is intended to be a fully functional, robust combat firearm. Not the sort of thing where you may need it once over the course of a military deployment, and if it only lasts a couple hundred rounds in combat because it's all made of polymer and it's fragile, or or it sacrifices something in shootability in order to be very compact and lightweight. That's not the concept here. The intention is to have a rugged and durable, but still compact submachine gun, that if this needs to engage in a sustained mag dump after mag dump firefight, it can do that like a full-size submachine gun, but still be compact enough to use. Anyway, this from the outside looks like a pretty typical, simple blowback submachine gun, and mechanically is. There are a bunch of pretty cool design elements inside it. So let's take a closer look inside, and let me show you all the secret internals of the CBJ MS. All right, so let's get the elephant in the room out of the way first. This is an M16 bipod, which is sort of a neat optional accessory. Up here at the muzzle, there's actually a sleeve over the very front end of the barrel that is specifically sized to attach to a standard old-fashioned M16 clothespin style bipod, and that gives you a bipod as a neat potential accessory. There are some historic submachine guns that have done this as well. The ZK383 in particular comes to mind, so not a lot of people doing that sort of thing these days. Anyway, moving on to the rest of the firearm, we have a vertical front grip, or an almost vertical front grip, that includes storage for a spare magazine, as well as the regular magazine in use. The magazine itself is basically a Swedish K magazine, so they maintain the feed dimensions. In fact, the whole feed system here is geometrically copied completely from the Swedish K, which helps it to be extremely reliable, basically being able to piggyback the standing on the shoulders of giants sort of concept, take the development, the very successful development of the M45 Swedish K, and maintain that geometry so that you don't have to re-engineer it yourself. The mag latch assembly is slightly different from the Swedish K, just in order to fit in this system. Now, the front magazine is just held in place with tension. There we go. We can pop that. So there are witness holes down to 36, but this is actually slightly shorter than a standard Swedish K mag. This holds 30 rounds. And it is chambered for the standard 9mm parabellum. They've done some experimentation using the 6.5 by 25mm CBJ cartridge in this gun. That's a subject for a separate video, which we will do. But for now, we're going to stick with just the 9mm iteration because that's how the gun is actually manufactured. From a user handling shooting perspective, the core mechanical element here is the grip safety. So it's on the front side of the pistol grip, and this is one of those things that maybe looks a little sketchy on paper, but actually handles very well. There's really no way to hold this thing in a firing position without depressing that grip safety. Obviously, you've probably noticed the visual similarity to an Uzi. Well, Uzi has a grip safety on the back strap here, and that is actually possible to grip without fully depressing the back strap. This, not so much. Now, we have a magazine release here that you push forward. As long as the grip safety is depressed, it locks the magazine catch in place, which prevents you from accidentally releasing the magazine when you're actually shooting. So you release the grip safety, push this forward. That is an ambidextrous control, so it's on both sides. There is a manual crossbolt safety here that will lock the gun, and it locks the gun by locking the grip safety forward. So very simple for that. The charging handle is this sort of plunger knob on the back end of the gun. This, operating kind of like you would think of maybe a Suomi or an AR-15, allows you to charge the bolt without having an open slot anywhere in the side or top of the gun to allow in dirt or debris. Again, if we compare this to the Uzi of course has a top-mounted charging handle, which makes really good sense until you get to the time frame when we're putting optics on the top of firearms. There's no place to put a charging handle up here when you instead have a really nice aimpoint red dot on it instead. So you end up with a rear charging handle, pulls back, push forward. This has a subtle locking system in it so that it doesn't bounce open, and that requires you to push the handle down just slightly in order to unlock it. If we look at this up close, you can see that little cutout. That locks it in place, push it down, and then you can pull back. Which, again, that sounds like a complicated thing. If you, there are a number of ways you can practice charging this where it just automatically puts that pressure on the charging handle. Whether it's putting a finger over the top, pull down and pull back, like that. In addition, there is a drop safety built in here, again, based on the grip safety. So if the grip safety is not depressed, the bolt will only travel halfway back, like that. That's not far enough to pick up a cartridge out of the magazine, and thus, if you drop the gun with a loaded mag and a closed bolt, it's not going to be able to bounce open enough to chamber and fire around without the trigger being pulled. Similarly, of course, once the bolt's open, if you don't have the grip safety depressed, the trigger is blocked and the gun can't fire. There is no fire selector. This actually has a progressive trigger in it, so a short trigger pull will fire a single round, and a long or longer trigger pull will fire in fully automatic. That's not a system that I'm normally a big fan of, personally, but the way that it's implemented in here is really pretty clever. So I'll show that to you when we take this apart in just a moment. The last element in the controls, I think, would be the wire stock, which is, again, quite simple. Push both of the locking tabs in, and you can collapse the stock all the way forward. It doesn't lock in the forward position, so in order to extend the stock, all you have to do is grab and pull. It comes out to the full extension and locks in place. Again, that's how you would want it for an actual combat firearm. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to fiddle with it. Just grab and pull until it locks in place. One last element to take a look at here before we start taking it apart are the sights. The rear sight is a drum with 3 different aperture sizes. There's the nice big close range one. There is a windage adjustment dial on the left side. And then the front sight is just a standard tall pin. You adjust elevation 0 simply by screwing that in and out. The much more modern practical solution, though, is the Picatinny rail on the top, where you can mount whatever sort of red dot you prefer. All right, disassembly begins by taking off the wire stock. Just push the buttons in like you're going to retract it, but pull the stock out instead. Quick detail, the end of the stock is threaded, so you can thread a cleaning rod tip in there as a cleaning tool. Then we have a cross pin right here. This is still sort of a prototype example. Production guns, this is going to be a captive pin. You can see they've actually cut it for a detent, but the detent isn't installed yet. So this pin comes out, and then the entire internal assembly, pull the trigger and the grip safety, and the entire bolt and spring, recoil, all the moving parts as an assembly come out the back of the gun. Super easy, super simple. We can take this down one more step by pushing this down, taking pressure off the spring and popping out this pin. Many of the pins, almost all of the pins in this design are actually relatively loose fitting because they're held in place by the other parts of the gun. So this pin, for example, can be a nice easy slip fit because it's sitting flush with the bolt rails, and so it can't come out while it's in the gun. Anyway, with that pin out, we can pull the bolt off of the recoil spring assembly. This is the ejector. We've got a little pad down here, hard rubber pad to absorb some of the impact at the end of travel, and then your charging handle is built into your recoil spring guide right down there. The bolt itself is very reminiscent of the Uzi. It's sort of a telescoped bolt where you have the majority of the bolt mass out in front to reduce overall receiver length. It has a fixed firing pin, so it fires from an open bolt, fixed firing pin. However, that firing pin is a separate component held in place by this roll pin, so it can be replaced. It means you can make it out of a differentially hardened material, if anything, easy to replace if it gets damaged somehow. Not really sure how you would damage that, but we have the extractor in here as well. This is kind of a cool element. The extractor is really easy to take out, which is really abnormal for basically all firearms. I just go to the back of the bolt, I push this in and down, and the extractor just pops right out the front of the bolt face. So I can just, to put it back in, you just put it in there. It's held in place by this curved wire spring. You just push it all the way in until it snaps. Replaced. Next up, we can remove the fire control group. That's done by pushing out this front pin right here, and we can use the pin from back there as a tool to do it. Pop that out. This pin has a little wire keeper spring to give it a little bit of tension. And then the front pistol grip is going to just come off here, like so. This is a little bit unusual in that the pistol, the fire control assembly, is attached to the vertical front grip. This is now basically finished. Let's see, I'll go ahead and take the barrel out. We'll finish off this element while we're right here. We have a spring-loaded ratchet here. Again, this is an element very similar to the Uzi. Just going to depress that tab, unscrew the barrel nut. This is that barrel sleeve that's designed specifically to fit the M16 clothespin bipod, and then the barrel sits in here like in Uzi. There we go. You can pop that out. You got two big long bearing surfaces to hold the barrel properly in place, and it's keyed up here. And now we have the whole thing, well, the whole body, completely field stripped. The grip stick is a part of the receiver. This is actually made as a single stamped stainless steel component. So I actually have here one of the, this is an example from very early in the stamping process for manufacturing one of these receivers, and you can see it's one continuous piece of sheet metal. So this is formed up, there's a weld, this is seamed together with a weld on the back. And then there are a couple of trunnions that are spot welded into it. You've got the one here at the back that has the feed ramp in it and the chamber support. And then there's a front trunnion that holds the barrel in at the front end. And that's not a whole lot else going on in there. All right, before we continue with disassembly here, first off, you wouldn't normally disassemble this as part of field stripping. This is really a detail stripping element. But what's cool here is this is the safety plate, and you've got a hole in it right there, which is connected to this little pin on the grip safety, like that. So when the grip safety is being depressed backward or released forward, what it's doing is actually moving that safety plate right there. When this is in the rear position, I can fire the gun. When it's in the forward position, it blocks the sear from dropping. Then the semi-auto progressive trigger functionality is based essentially on the two little bumps on the front of this sear. So if I pull the trigger just to this position, that's semi-auto firing. The sear drops far enough to release the bolt. So normally this is going to be sitting right like this. I pull the trigger. I don't know if I can do this really with all the parts out of the gun, but I pull the trigger, boom, like that. It drops, it allows the bolt to go forward, but the bolt is going to hit these two little nubs, and when it does, it bounces the disconnector, which you'll see in a moment, and lifts the sear back up. So when the gun fires and comes back, it gets caught, and it is semi-auto only. Again, that's the semi-auto firing depth. Hit that, it pops the sear back up and renders it semi-auto. Now, if I pull it all the way, so I don't just go to there, I pull it farther, it drops enough that those two semi-auto bumps are fully retracted down, nothing catches on the bolt, and it simply fires until I release the trigger. All right, now to further disassemble this, I can use one of my existing pins as a tool. I'm just going to pop out the trigger pin first. Again, this is a nice loose pin, which makes it easy to remove because once it's in the gun, this is held captive by the receiver and the pin can't go anywhere anyway. With the pin out, I can rotate the trigger 90 degrees, pull it down. There's that. Then I pull out these two guys. There's the safety plate, and this is essentially the transfer bar. So the trigger is going to sit here, and when I pull the trigger, I'm rotating this up and down. Let's pull out the sear assembly itself from the front. There we go. There's the front pin. Then I need to push this down. I can slide it back. At this point, I do need a little tool to push this back. And out it comes in the back. So that is the sear itself. You can see the element that sticks up. There's the sear spring that's always pushing it up. And then we have this little rocker tab in the back. So the way this works is that this hook sits on this little shelf back here. When this is pushed up into the top of the trigger assembly, that shelf pushes back a little bit like that. So I'm sitting here, and when I pull the trigger, it's going to pull this whole thing down like so. And as long as I'm maintaining tension here, it holds the sear down. When the bolt bumps on these two stops, it releases this, which disconnects from the hook here and pops the thing back up, ready to, well, requiring another trigger press to fire again. If I give this a full press all the way down, it maintains pressure, holds the sear down, and doesn't reset until I manually release the trigger. So it's a clever system. It's also very easy to modify this to be either full auto, which would be very simple, or semi-auto. Normally, having a semi-auto only version of a submachine gun can be a little bit tricky to do. Here, all that's required is taking one of these spring-loaded stops and just giving it a higher position so that the trigger can only be pressed the semi-auto required depth and can't go down far enough for full auto. So from a military or a police use perspective, the cool thing you can do here is you make a separate semi-auto version of this part, and that's the only modification necessary to turn this into a semi-auto only gun, say for training, or if the police want to deploy with a semi-auto gun, but have the option to have full auto available for specially trained officers or something. So that's actually exactly what they've done here. They've made a semi-auto version of this transfer bar and then painted the trigger red to indicate that it's semi-auto only. And you could very easily have a second fire control unit like this that you don't have to fiddle with all the internal parts. You just hook the grip safety in there, pop this into a gun, and voila, you've got the semi-auto version of the gun. All right, and there you go. There is a fully field stripped CBJ MS 9mm submachine gun. This project is in development, like I said, in CBJ's free time while he's working for the Carl Gustafs factory through the 1990s. Well, eventually in 1997, he leaves the factory. Well, he leaves the factory and in 1997 forms his own company, CJB Tech AB. The AB is like company, corporation in Swedish. And at that point essentially has two ongoing projects to choose from, to work on. One is this submachine gun, which is now mostly in its final stages, just needs a little bit of polishing, a little bit of tweaking to bring onto the market. And the other is the 6.5 by 25mm cartridge that he's been working on developing at the same time, again, on his own time while working for Carl Gustafs. The decision in the 1990s, well, first, they finish up the submachine gun, but then come to the conclusion that the better project to put the effort into is the new cartridge. It is a very high velocity, sabot armor-piercing pistol cartridge with a lot of interesting potential to it, and this is that time frame when a lot of other PDWs are coming onto the market. In particular, NATO is looking at the P90 and the HK 4.6mm cartridge. And judging from between the two projects, the company decides to put most of its resources into developing that new cartridge. And so the submachine gun kind of goes onto a shelf where it essentially has stayed until the present day. Now, today, the military-industrial situation in Europe is quite a lot different than it was in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, and there may still be a place for a submachine gun like this. With the military developments in Ukraine and the military preparedness in general becoming a much higher priority throughout Europe. So it will be very interesting to see where this goes. I think it has some pretty darn interesting features, and it's a very clever, well thought out design. So big thanks to CBJ himself for giving me access to this one to show to you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.